Ruth. And this is absolutely has become one of my favorite books in the whole Bible. And I'll tell you what triggered that was about 5-6 years ago. I was running a fair amount of tours for Christian Tours in the fall, and they needed people to take groups to Sight and Sound Theater in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So at Lancaster, I happened to go, I think, 3 different times during that period when the play that was being shown was Ruth. And seeing the play made me go, I'm going to read that passage again and read it pretty quickly, which we'll do today. And so it was just a beautifully done play that's so thrilling that I was anxious to see it the 3rd time as I was the first time. And I'm not the sort of person that watches a movie twice. So if you ever say to me, have you seen a movie? And I say, yes, I've seen it once. I don't watch stuff a second time. But Ruth actually saw it 3 times, I believe, that fall, and was thrilled to see it every time. First of all, Sight and Sound Theater, if you have never been to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, how many have been there? Okay? If you go, you will go, wow.
I saw Noah.
You saw Noah, okay? Noah is considered to be kind of the kingpin of, like just the best of all of them. I saw the In the Beginning, which is about creation also. And they have one on David and so forth. By far and away, the best Christian-themed experience I've ever had as far as any place, anywhere. So it is superior to most plays on Broadway. And I meant superior, not equal to. It is every bit as good as even high-production plays in New York City. So we will, at some point, we'll have to run a church group up there too. That'd be worth doing.
Right now, I'm writing down all these scriptures.
Yeah. Hit DC on the way up, spend just a little bit of time, and then on up to Lancaster. All right, so the book of Ruth. Here's what MacArthur calls this. MacArthur says, what Venus is to statuary and the Mona Lisa is to paintings, Ruth is to literature. And indeed, it is a beautiful book. It is beautifully written, and the story is so perfectly encapsulated, and the message is really a wonderful message too. So on your study sheet, we'll start with the author, who is unknown. Now, Jewish tradition assigns it to Samuel, but we do not know for sure. There is no reference to, it could very well be Samuel, but we don't know for sure. The date of writing is unknown. However, the events occurring in the book most likely occurred around 1100 BC, but were most likely recorded during the reign of King David around 1000 BC. We can date it to the point of, it says it occurred during the time of the judges, and then by putting some things together, like towards the end of the book, where it says the way things were in those days, it's looking back. And so we can kind of get to approximate dates. The setting. The events occurred during the time of the judges in the previous book of the Bible. So the book we just studied, the book of Judges, this occurs within that time frame, the book of Ruth, all right? So the story occurs within that time frame. The locations of Bethlehem and Judah and the land of Moab are where the story of Ruth, Naomi, Boaz, and other historical characters live out the events over a period of about 11 years. So back to my map, because once you go to Israel, you will never ever read the Bible the same. You will always start putting places with the text. So Bethlehem is that spot right here. And as you can see, Jerusalem is there. That's about a 5 to 6 mile trek from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. And so Bethlehem is in Judah. And if you have this that I printed for you at one point, where the tribes are, you will see that the tribe of Judah is the big tribe, the big one to the south, okay? And the reason it's very big is a whole bunch of it is not inhabitable. When you see the land, you'll understand. It is desert. But Judah contains Bethlehem. And where is Moab? Well, Moab is over here, okay? So the land of Moab is here. By the way, the land of Moab is inhabited first by the descendants of Lot from his incestuous relations with his daughters who got him drunk And so Moab and Ammon are the two places that those two sons end up. By the way, Moab and Ammon oftentimes are problematic and enemies of Israel. But you recall when Moses on the Exodus, he did not attempt to conquer those lands because they had been promised to them by God. They wanted to just pass through. Okay? So that is the spot over there. And again, guys, I cannot express to you enough this line here between up here, the beginning of the Jordan, coming down the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. This rift right here is a major, major rift. Major, like from here to over there, it looks easy. It's not, because it is a huge rift. Of course, this ends up 1,350 feet below sea level. The lowest point on earth is at the Dead Sea. So from here to here, while it doesn't look like a long ways, is really a long ways. Does that make sense? All right, like I talk about sometimes, you ever try to go to Shelby? There's no good way to get there.
You're right.
That's what I mean. There's no good way to get there. All the roads are crummy. It's like you can go this way or that way, but it's just awkward from here. So that's kind of what that situation is. The purpose. The historical book documents the ancestry of David while showing the love and mercy of the sovereign God to provide for his people. In Boaz, as the kinsman redeemer, we have a beautiful picture pointing to Jesus Christ, who would one day come to redeem his chosen bride. The outline I have stolen as credited from Wiersbe's outlines, and you will see he does a focus on Ruth: sorrow, service, submission, satisfaction in Ruth, weeping, working, waiting, and her wedding. So that is a helpful thing to hang some things on. Now, here's what I want to do, because I want to read this story. We'll read it a chapter maybe at a time, okay? And then go to the notes, reinforce some things, and then go on. I think we can read this whole story. So I was real excited today because I feel like I'll do semi-justice to a book, because it's only 4 chapters, as opposed to surveying like we have to in the rest of it. All right, so Ruth chapter 1, it says this. Now it came about in those days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Then she arose with her daughter-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-laws with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you find rest, each in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said to her, "No, but we will surely return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I have said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they are grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you. For the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, "Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem, and when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, our daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. So we see in this first chapter that famine and death are the background of the fallen world. All right? We see famine and death are indeed the background. And again, we live in a fallen world. The older that I get, the more fallen it looks to me. Okay? So when I was 15 or 16, I knew there was trouble. At 53, I go, wow, even so come Lord Jesus, because, we are a mess, all right? It's a fallen world even here. Famine and death are ruling. Number one, a family living in Bethlehem, also called Ephrathah, in Judah, moved to the land of Moab because of a famine in their land. Elimelech and Naomi with their two sons, Mahlon meaning sickly, Chilion meaning failing, lived there for several years. All right, so
Why don't you name your kids?
yeah, it's interesting how in this case there's actually, and again, names can have various meanings. They can mean different things, but the providence of God, even in naming of the children, is evident.
You're not really being optimistic on their behalf of the name of that.
That's true. That's true. How many
Kind of
people?
set them up.
How many people name their kid Jezebel today?
Well, there you go.
All right, and so it is interesting how names, and oftentimes in Scripture, we'll see it with Naomi here in just a second. Number two, first Elimelech dies, and then the two sons who had married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, both die, leaving all three women alone. Interesting to note that all three couples were not blessed with children while living in Moab. Interesting to note it, okay? Because many commentators, in fact, Wiersbe in his outline calls it Naomi tries to run from her problems. Number B, Naomi tries to cover up her mistakes. So many commentators will say them leaving from here to go to Moab was not what they should have done. Now Elimelech led them, so Ruth goes with. Ruth is not held responsible for that decision. But none of the three couples reproduced in the land of Moab. All right? So there were 0 for 3 couples, which is highly unusual in a culture that values children. So you can tell by Naomi's wording that she really believes that God has chastised her for, I left full, I came back empty. And so just an interesting note. Then the second thing, time to return from Moab to Bethlehem. Number one, the word of the Lord that he was providing food for his people in Judah reaches Naomi in Moab. She sets out with her 2 daughter-in-laws to cross the Jordan to get back to Bethlehem. She tells the younger women to go back to their households in Moab so that they could find a husband there. Orpah does leave, but Ruth clings to Naomi with the desire to be part of the people of God. Folks, we can't read this too flat, all right? The flat thing is, okay, yeah, she is leaving her relatives. She's leaving where she grew up. She's leaving all of her family. Why? Because she has committed to the God of Israel. All right? So, a couple things come to mind. Abram, back in Genesis 12, God said, "Get up and go. I'm going to make a great nation of you." And what did he do? He got up and went. All right? Willing to leave family in order to follow God. So when we get into the New Testament, we see Jesus says this: anybody who does not hate their mother and father, he's mean hate in the way that we think on the surface? No. He's meaning love for Christ is going to trump everything. I'm willing to separate from everything and everybody else in order to follow the risen Lord. So we see this in Ruth, her willingness to go and leave her country where she grew up. I was having this discussion with a friend of mine, and I said, to leave a place where you have been your entire life is difficult. Some people have never been outside of the county they live in. Basically. It's like, they are not comfortable getting outside of here. So this is a big deal, and even bigger then than it is today, that she's willing to go.
Because, I mean, Naomi kind of hits the nail on the head. She says, why are you following me? I don't have anything to offer you at all.
Very true. In other words, she is willing to cling to Naomi, not because of the benefit to her, okay? But she is looking to help Naomi, and she understands this God of Israel is the God, all right? Not the God of Moab, which was typically Chemosh, where they're sacrificing children to Chemosh and so forth. And so she knows that this is the God who is to be followed. All right, so where am I? Number 3, the travelers make it back to Bethlehem, and the city is excited to see Naomi again along with the stranger Ruth. They were excited to see her. All right, so Bethlehem is, by the way, it's not a big town. In fact, 1,000 years later, when the angel comes to a young Mary, Bethlehem is still just a little grease spot on the map. It's a nothing little town made up of maybe 20 or 30 families. So this is a small little place, and they were excited to see her. And so notice this, number 4, Naomi, which means pleasant, tells the people to call her Mara, which means bitter, because God has sent her back empty when she left full. Now I'm going to make an observation here. I say Naomi obviously is not exactly treasuring life itself or the young God-fearing woman who had decided to stay with her no matter what. Would you agree? She's not exactly treasuring life, nor is she really treasuring Ruth. She's like, life's over for me. Just call me bitter, all right? Because God has dealt with me bitterly. So she's not exhibiting here the tremendous go forward and I'm going to make it, because you know what? She's like you and me. We are not always on the top of our game with, no matter what happens, I'm marching forward and I'm not letting anything get to me. The Bible, warts and all, reveals how we are. And indeed, we see Naomi is pretty beat down when she comes back to Bethlehem. So then, number 5, the time of their return was the beginning of harvest, yet another visible blessing of God to a land that had been suffering from famine. So in this process of coming back, it's just when the crops start coming in, and you guys have heard me say this before, growing up in Minnesota and going to southern Minnesota during harvest time, there is a magic in the air to the crop, dry, brown, and combines going in to get it, okay? And when your uncle's a farmer and he only stops long enough to eat and then go back with lights to go keep working because it's dry and ready, and you say, how is it? And he goes, it's pretty good. Man, it's magic. It's not even my crop. It's emotionally magic. Some of you garden because of that, all right? I go to the grocery store instead of gardening. Actually, I go to my parents because they like to garden, and I don't like it, but it's still magic, all right?
Even on a small scale, it's really satisfying to harvest what you grow yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of these things God has built in. So Naomi has some blessings in her life, and she's kind of overlooking them here, is all I want to point out. Then we come to chapter 2, and chapter 2 says this. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, may the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? The servant is in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Then she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. Then she fell on her face bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your mother and your father and the land of your birth, and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, although I am not like one of your maidservants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here, that you may eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." So they gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat up what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left over after she was satisfied. That was lunch, by the way. Her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead." Again Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative, he is one of our closest relatives." Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you shall stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest." Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So we get to chapter 2, and Ruth goes to work to provide for the two of them. All right, Ruth goes to work. You say, all right, what do you mean goes to work? Because what could she do? As a woman in that time period, no husband, what she could do is go glean from the fields. All right? So she goes out to glean in a field, which is a practice in the law of Moses for the poor to go back into the crops and pick up the scraps that were left after the harvesters had gone through first. Leviticus 19:10 will tell us, it says this, "Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God." So we see the command in the law of Moses that they weren't to get every last bit, that was designed for the poor to be able to come in behind and get what they need. We see a principle, by the way, in God's economy of providing for the poor, but the poor are working also. Interesting. All right? She goes and does what she's going to do, and she gleans and begins to pick up the leftovers. I think about this because I'm going to take you to my grandmother Willms farm in southern Minnesota. And Grandma would have a garden, but her garden was like 2 acres. You know, it was when 160-acre farm, a quarter in a 160-acre farm, but there was an acre or two of her garden. Well, one of those things in Minnesota were potatoes. And the potatoes, those that don't know, grow underground. You take like this pitchfork, you jam it into the ground and turn the soil over. And potatoes in southern Minnesota, because the dirt is pitch black, they come out like this. And lots of them, like every plant you turn over, and there's like this, like this, like this. And then there's some little ones. And I remember with my grandmother, picking them up to put them in the bowl, and I'm working to get every last one, and she says, "Don't worry about the little ones." All she wanted was the big ones, because there's so much, so ample. Of course, the little ones, people actually pay a premium for, today.
They're the best ones.
Yeah, they're the best ones. But all of these were so good because the soil is so good. So I think about that, how Grandma would say, just leave them. Now, in biblical times, it would have been the poor would have come through, picked up every last bit of that, and the poor are taken care of, and nothing is wasted, and it's a beautiful thing. All right, so number 2, by God's providential hand, she ends up gleaning in the field of Boaz, who was a close relative of Elimelech, Naomi's husband. Boaz is a man of some means, but more importantly, he has great values. Boaz had some money, but more importantly, he had great values, and we're going to see that in this story as it plays out. Some of the things, number 8, he greets his workers with the blessing of the Lord. I love that. He comes to the fields, may the Lord bless you. All right? Number B, he notices the younger Ruth and questions his reapers about her. Number C, he counsels her to continue to glean in his field for safety and blessing. Number 4, or D, he commends her for leaving her home and family in order to seek refuge provided by God in the land of Israel. And I love this phrase. He said, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Okay? Under his wings. It's going to come into play a little bit later in the book, too. Number E, he feeds her for free, along with the laborers who are generating him money. So she's in on the free lunch program that was for the workers, and he provides for her even though she's not generating any money. Number F, he instructs his workers to deliberately leave behind some extra from the fields that they would normally bring into the barn. All right? So Boaz is a man of value. He also has taken kindly to Ruth. Then number 3, Ruth returns home with the impressive take from her work in the fields and tells Naomi that the owner was Boaz. Naomi informs her of the relationship of Boaz to the family. Now quickly we'll cover this idea of a kinsman, a close relative, was established in the Old Testament law, Deuteronomy 25, where if one man would die, his brother was instructed to go in and to marry that widow so that his name would continue and that she would be taken care of. It was the Old Testament law of the way it was done. So that's when they're talking about close relatives and kinsmen. It's based off of that Mosaic law in Deuteronomy 25. All right, so now we move to chapter 3. So,
and Ruth actually took her life in her hands and her safety in her hands by going out to glean, because it sounds like they were probably assaulted, treated badly, and she went even knowing that would happen to her.
Single women are at risk today by themselves all over the world. Okay? All over the world. Single women are at risk today. And especially in the Middle East. Because women are second-class citizens even today at best. I say they're third class. Because animals and cars are viewed as more important than women to most of the Middle East. All right? That's how it is. She certainly was at some risk. No question about it. That's why Boaz offers her safety. Stay in my fields. I've instructed my people to not touch you and to help you. All right? Mankind's been evil forever. All right? We didn't invent it. We're trying to perfect it, in this day and age. But we didn't invent it. Mankind is hopelessly lost and in need of a Savior. All right? So we move on to chapter 3. And I may not be able to read every verse, but let's read these first few. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, interesting, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose his maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lays down that you shall notice the place where he lies. You shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do. She said to her, all that you say I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Then he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night. When morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. All right, so we'll take a look at the study notes here. Naomi tells Ruth how to work for the proposal of redemption. All right, that's what Naomi's telling her. And so what does he tell her? Number 1, get cleaned up. Put on perfume, that's get anointed. Get dressed and go to where you'll be enjoying the evening after a great harvest without letting yourself be noticed. All right? So, by the way, where had Ruth been the entire day? In the fields. Okay? I mean, I'm telling you, even a day in modern day Israel, I will come back to my hotel and I'll look at my shoes and go, wow, because they've turned a different color, even modern day. It's a dusty land. And so, water also is precious in the Middle East even today. It was then too. So, this idea of getting washed and cleaned up was not something you could do all the time. But here, Naomi says, wash, clean, put on your clothes, go down there. Number 2, when Boaz lays down, go in and lay crossways at his feet and uncover them. Note her request in 3:9 for him to spread his covering over her. So spread your covering over your mate, for you are a close relative. That idea of spread your cover over you relates directly back to Boaz saying of you seeking to come to Israel so that the God of Israel would cover you. All right? The exact same wording. And it's beautiful. She is looking for Boaz to be the person who is going to cover her and protect her and give her safety and refuge. And indeed, Boaz had already said that the God of Israel does that. So this is a beautiful coming together picture here. All right? Now, number 3, Ruth does exactly as instructed, and Boaz is startled awake in the middle of the night. All right? Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. This custom, whatever it was, and what Naomi said to do, worked perfectly. All right? It is not, again, a prescription for this is how you should get a man to propose to you today. Nor is it, we don't even fully understand it. My scholars argue about it, but we don't even fully understand it. All we can say is this. There is no question, based on the reading of the text and the way Boaz responds, there was absolutely no immorality involved whatsoever. Okay? This was purity, and there was not any crossing of a line there. All right? But this is, again, not, you don't tell your teenage daughter this is how you get proposed to. It's not a prescription. It is a description of what happened. We've seen that throughout the Old Testament. Lots of descriptions, not a whole lot of prescription about this is how you should do it today. All right? The next big point. Boaz tells Ruth the redemption process. So he praises her for not just seeking youth, as Boaz was substantially older. So Boaz praises her for not just seeking youth. And, of course, with youth comes better looks, stronger, so forth and so on. In other words, it is much easier for a young woman to say, I want a young man, and it's about all kinds of, not bad inherently, but let's face it, age does not make us better in a lot of ways as it relates to youth and vigor. I mean, it's amazing how tired I get now, that things that didn't used to make me tired. So she is obviously not wired into just a physical situation here. And he praises her for it. Number 2, he tells her not to fear, as he will do everything to make sure that she is redeemed. All right, I love this when he says, do not fear. All right, what does the angel of the Lord always say when he shows up to somebody and they go, oh, don't fear, don't fear. And we see from Boaz, do not fear. I am going to make sure that you are redeemed. That's in fact what he's saying. I'm going to protect you. Do not fear. All right? Number A there's one before him that had the first right to redeem. So in that process, the closest one to Elimelech in the line was the first one that was the kinsman redeemer. And Boaz was the second in line. So number B, if that relative passed, then Boaz would gladly pay the price. And then Boaz, number 3, told her to stay until early morning, sent her back to Naomi with a large measure of barley, which indicated his intentions to provide for Naomi and Ruth. All right, so she goes back, and chapter 4 tells us this. First of all, we'll finish chapter 3. Naomi said in verse 18, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today. So Naomi goes, he's going to solve this today. All right? I know. He sent home all of this barley, all of this. It's an intention. He's given his intention. He wants to provide. All right? And sure enough, what happens? Now when Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. So the closest redeemer says, I'm in. All right, I'll buy it. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. Verse 6, the closest relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself, that you may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. All right? So what we see here is number 4, or chapter 4, Boaz completes the redemption process. Number 1 there, the transaction was done legally at the city gate. All right, so oftentimes when it talks about the gates of the city, and this is something else, why I prefer a translation of Scripture to be more literal than making translation choices for me. For instance, when it says they went to the gate of the city, some translations will say went to the decision-making area. In other words, the gate of the city. Yes, it was the gate, the in and out, but it also was the main point of consummating legal activities because everybody hung out there. There were retailers, there were lawyers, there were judges, and the gate of the city is where the activity happened. All right? So that's where he went. It's important to note, as much as Boaz was in this for the long haul, he did it legally. He went to and followed the law perfectly. All right? He didn't short-circuit it. He went exactly the right way. Number 2, the closer relative passed on the deal when informed he would have to marry Ruth the Moabite, as it would jeopardize his inheritance. Do we know how it would jeopardize? The Bible doesn't tell us for sure. But it could be that his family would disown him if he married a Moabite woman. All right? Could very well be. And it could also be that he hadn't had a son yet, and he's afraid that if he has a son with her first, everything flows to that son. And so, who knows?
What happens if the brother that's supposed to marry the widow is already married?
If he couldn't marry, it would fall to the next one. The idea is, and there's some debate about this, the debate is, would the married one have to marry the other? Which happened at times, but God's intent, I believe, would be the unmarried brother, as you come down the line, would marry them. All right? Again, God's ideal and what man does with God's ideal are two totally different things. Because God did indeed make man and woman to cleave together as one flesh. And yet, we've boogered that up since the beginning of time. Okay? So, where am I?
3.
Boaz marries Ruth and redeems everything that belonged to Elimelech and Naomi's sons. So in verses 9 and 10, he does and acquires everything. Verse 11, all the people were in the court, and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming to your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. May you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Then it says this, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and get this, and is better to you than 7 sons. That's high praise, folks. Middle East, this is high praise. has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron Ram, to Ram Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. That's as in King David. All right, so number 4, God blesses them with a son, Obed, and Ruth with a grandson. All right, don't lose track of that. Grandchildren are even better than regular children, is what the people that have them say. All right, because with grandchildren you get to just spoil, love, get unconditional love, and then pass them back. And so this idea of having grandchildren is glorious. And then it says this, would be the great-grandfather of King David. So Obed is going to be the great-grandfather of King David. And of course, in the physical line of the Lord Jesus Christ, because we know Christ ascends through that line of King David. So when we go to Matthew chapter 1, we get the genealogy. And in the genealogy, we see this story shows up in the genealogy. But not only this story, but I want you to realize something about Boaz. Boaz was the son of Rahab, the harlot. Okay? Our God works and connects dots. So this woman is delivered in Jericho because she hides the spies and trusts in the God of Israel. She is giving land and a place to live. She gives birth to this guy named Boaz, who turns out to be pretty good guy. All right? The line of Christ is connected to the line of David. We see one of the purposes of this book. Now, I put what a glorious God to make some observations that I wanted to make, that I think the book wants to make. Number 1, God is always working, even in times of despair, darkness and despair. Okay? God is always working. He is always working. Folks, Piper says, as Clint has quoted, we're aware many times of 3 things that are going on that God is kind of connecting the dots. Behind it is 10,000 things God is doing to connect the dots. God is working. The time of the judges was a time, as we saw last week, of a spiral of miserable despair. It really was. People were getting worse and worse. In the middle of that, here's this little interlude of God uses his remnant to do work. Okay? Number 2, God is always concerned for the widow, the foreigner, and the helpless. God is always concerned for the widow, the foreigner, and the helpless. By the way, we should be too. All right? If God's concerned, we should be too. Number 3, God is sovereign, orchestrating the activities of mankind to accomplish his will. Okay? Psalm chapter 2 says it this way. Why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrifying them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. We see that our God is sovereign, and he will take the activities of man and put it together for his purposes. All right? Even evil activities of man, God can take and use for good. Now, carry it forward to Romans, and Paul says that I know this, that everything, to those who love God, everything comes together and it works for his glory. It is for his good. It is for our good to do his glory. So hear me out. Even the sinful things that we have done, and we have been chastised, and it has put us into positions where we go, boy, I sure wish I wouldn't have done that. When we love God today, he even takes those crummy things we did, and he uses somehow in order to glorify him as we move forward from those things. There's not a single one of us in here that doesn't have things that we would love to have changed. But you know what? We move forward from here. I press on toward the call of the prize of the high calling of the one who has graciously redeemed me and saved me from my own sin and disasters. By the way, Genesis 50 says this. Joseph looks at his brother and he said, what you meant for harm, God meant for good. All right? You sold me into slavery, but God used it to deliver you. Number 4, God's plan has always been to reach those who were far off. God's plan has always been to reach those who were far off. Guess what? Over here in Moab, there was a woman named Ruth. And the hounds of heaven are sick done. And God reaches those who are far off. We go to the New Testament, Paul says, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. All right? You weren't Jews, you were just Goy, you're Gentiles living pagan lives, and God went out and got them far away. Number 5, God redeems those unable to pay the price themselves. All right? You can't pay the price for the redemption of your soul. Naomi could not pay the price. Boaz could. He had what it took. All right? Jesus is the perfect Boaz who can pay the price to redeem our soul. And number 6, God turns the hopeless into the grace-filled. When we saw Naomi, what did we see? Call me bitter. My life's over. At the end of the book, what do we see? Naomi's got a grandson bouncing on and she gets to be the nurse of that child. The child turns out to be in the line of David, and Naomi's life goes from bitter to full. All right? God changes people, and thank heavens he can change you if you've never been changed today. Dr. Willmington does this in closing. In his Bible handbook, he projects what somebody might say if they were speaking. Okay, so hear me out. What they might say if they spoke. In other words, this is not scripture, it's just what he projects. And he says this. He said, my mother had repeatedly urged me to choose a godly woman. Apparently, she still suffered from some unpleasant memories concerning her immoral past, in spite of God's marvelous transforming grace. Of course, until that first encounter in the field, neither mother nor son could have imagined that God would select a Moabite widow to answer our prayers. All right, so I think it's interesting to think about Boaz growing up in the redeemed house now of Rahab, and how her instruction might have very well been, make sure and get a good woman, a godly woman, and that's indeed what God provides. Close in prayer. Father God, I thank you for the beautiful story of Boaz as a kinsman redeemer, but Lord, even more so, the absolutely phenomenal story of Jesus Christ as the perfect kinsman redeemer who willingly pays the price, and that price is death and destruction on the cross of Calvary because of my sin. Lord, I'm thankful that he paid the price and adopted me as a son, and Lord, I'm grateful for the fact that because of that, I stand here today knowing that you are my God and that heaven is my home. Lord, I pray that you'll help anybody in here to realize that if they're trusting in their own righteousness, that they need a far greater righteousness than that. Lord, may you help each one of us that has put our faith and trust completely in Christ to live like it this week. May you bless the service to follow. We thank you for the opportunity to worship together.